Hello and welcome to Forum for a Better Understanding. I'm your host, Jim Grant, and very glad to be back with you again, the fourth time that we're looking at a very important topic. Michelle Alexander, a legal scholar and law professor at Ohio State University, emphatically has asserted that Ronald Reagan's fabricated war on drugs in the 1980s has blossomed into a well-disguised, comprehensive, and intentional system that she calls the new Jim Crow. According to Michelle, this system was created by the political elite, the media, and by redirecting of public funds to policing this war on drugs. Today we have another studio audience and panel to share with you around this topic one more time. To my left is Reverend Dr. Karen Crozier, an educator, minister, and scholar activist who is committed to being an agent of God's love, hope, and justice in this world. In the middle of our table, we have the Reverend Susan Kroeker, an ordained minister who has walked alongside many women re-entering the community after jail and prison in Toronto and Fresno, and has helped them develop re-entry plans after their incarceration. Across from me is my good friend, the Reverend Floyd Harris, who is associate pastor of the New Light for New Life Church in West Fresno and founder of the National Network in Action. I'd like to challenge our panel right off the top with a very important question that they could develop and answer in any way they'd like. How is this claim of Michelle Alexander's book relevant, pertinent, significant for informing your personal philosophy of Christian ministry? Susan, could you unpack that for us and personally share how it colors, directs, gives form to your form of ministry, what Michelle has given us as her thesis?
Sure. Yeah, thanks for having me on this show. I'm appreciating being here.
Thank you.
One of the things that stuck out for me with Michelle Alexander's book is the way that she talked about how the majority of people are incarcerated for nonviolent or drug-related crimes. And I think that's so contrary to what is shown in our media. Our media shows, the kinds of flashy, sort of violent kidnappings and those kinds of crimes. And so just this reality check that the majority of people are incarcerated with a root cause of addiction or some sort of economic need. And she also highlights just the way that violent crimes may fluctuate over periods of time. They may fluctuate mildly, but incarceration rates have skyrocketed in the last decade. And those two things are very they're disconnected, and they're not directly proportional. And so just thinking about incarceration as being very linked to problems of addiction in our communities, and seeing addiction as a root need. And I view addiction as something that is rooted in communities, and it's related to community healing as the way out. Another thing that Michelle Alexander said that really struck me was the rates of people who are incarcerated that are parents. And so over half of people who are incarcerated have children under the age of 18. That's 54%. And to me, that's just startling, the way that children are growing up without parents in the home. They're growing up with parents in prison, and how children are bearing some of that shame and some of that stigma.
Oh, yeah.
I think that's a very heavy burden, and especially in African American communities, 1 in 9 African American children in the United States has a parent who's incarcerated. So to me, I feel like this means that there's a community response, and that there's a whole family response to incarceration, thinking about the ways that communities can address the root causes of addiction, and also envelop entire families that are experiencing the impact of incarceration.
And what's so important about your response, it was to the question of how does her claim, how is it relevant for a Christian minister? Because if we are ministering in a setting that is totally oblivious to this phenomenon with those statistics that are devastating in their truth, we do need to address them. So thank you as a minister to be addressing that in your ministry. Floyd, you've been ministering on the West Side now very beautifully, very prophetically. What gives direction to yours?
Thank you for having me today, and also the panel, and especially Dr. Crozier. She's been an inspiration to me, and somehow, some way, she always finds me to bring me to the right table. And so I believe this is the right table today.
Today it is.
Today it is. And so, you know, I just want to thank Dr. Elizabeth Swearington for bringing us together around the Freedom School. And I think that's where a lot of this started. And I brought Dr. Crozier in, and then she took, grew rings and flew with it. And that's a good thing, and that's what we're trying to do. But, the way I see things is going on, I reside in West Fresno for 41 years, grassroots organizer, civil rights leader, assistant pastor, New Life Church of God, and my senior pastor is Paul McCoy. And, when I look at my school system and know that prisons are built off of education, when I go to a Colorblindness school, Carver Elementary, and a test is done, out of 253 students, only 3 pass from the 5th to the 8th grade. Those children are products for the prison industry. That's a system that's setting them up to fail. When I look at a juvenile hall facility that was just built with 1,400 beds, with not 1,400 kids to go in there, then that's telling me that the system is getting ready to put someone in there. And so when I look at that, I look at my children being set up to go in those beds. And so also when we look at African American children whose rights are being raped from them from the ages of 7 years old, by the time they get to high school, they've already dropped out of school. So they're products for the prison industry. And so and that voting piece is a big major piece, because if you look at all of the young black men and brown men that's in prison right now, it could overturn our election process. Yeah. So when our children right now cannot have the right to vote, then you look at those children that do have the right to vote, then you will see who will control policy. And it's not us here in Fresno County or even Fresno City. My community has the highest concentration of poverty next to Katrina here in the world.
Oh, yeah. But
yet when you look at Fresno County and the San Joaquin Valley, we have more prisons, more men inside prisons, but yet there's $39 billion worth of agriculture a year in the San Joaquin Valley. When you look at those statistics, you have to wonder, well, why there's something wrong with that there? And so those are concerns that I bring and feel that my community do not have the same resources as a Clovis community, as a Buchanan High School, as a Clovis West. And so those children that lives in those communities over there in Clovis can prosper because they have the resources. My children in West Fresno don't even have a music program. Music helps our children to think, to read, to understand mathematically. So, but when you compare notes from one community to the next community, you have to say, well, to me it's a no-brainer who's going to succeed and who's going to fail.
It's interesting that we're looking so concretely at Fresno, seeing it as a real laboratory in what's going on and what isn't going on. Karen, I wonder if you want to be the third respondent to that initial question. How is what Michelle Alexander proposes just relevant to you as a Christian ministry philosopher? How does it gird your whole ministry? How does it shape it?
Right. One of the things that you quoted from Alexander in the beginning of this program was that this is a disguised, well, comprehensive, intentional system. And then when we look at the invisibility, the ways that it plays out to those who are being impacted, and what Reverend Harris was able to raise as far as the phenomenon, not only of the new Jim Crow, but the cradle to prison pipeline. And so therefore, it is incumbent upon me to realize what Sister Helen Prejean, who is intensely involved in death row prison ministry, that every person is worth more than their crime. And so therefore, I am informed by looking at the present context and not being afraid of it nor overwhelmed by it, even what Susan was able to identify concerning the grave statistics in light of what Alexander brings to our attention and the ways that she connects the dots around the new Jim Crow. And it's all around low-level drug offenders who have become criminalized, not necessarily because of their drug use, but as Michelle Alexander identifies, because of the color of their skin. And so we have this painful reality, but this great hope that every person is worth more than the crime that they have committed, and as well as those who are behind the systems, those who confess themselves to be Christians or Christian ministers, how can they see themselves as being possibly complicit to a system that is alienating those whom God still cares for too? And so therefore, I am mindful of the reality of who is really the criminal in this process.
Now, there was this quote, I think, from Luke that you have wanted, I think, to help us appreciate the scriptural base to where your philosophy takes its rooting. And maybe we could post that up. Would you like to unpack for us the thought from Luke?
This is Jesus' inaugural sermon, according to biblical scholars, in the Gospel of Luke. And he states, as he was in the synagogue on that day, that the Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to preach good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim release to the captives and recovery of sight to the blind, to set at liberty those who are oppressed, to proclaim the acceptable year of the Lord. And after Jesus had spoken that word from the prophetic text of Isaiah, he closed it and put it down and says, on this day, this is fulfilled in your hearing. And so it invites me also, if I am proclaiming to be a Christ follower, and then these are the particular groups, to proclaim liberty to those who are captive. There's many people who are not only spiritually captive, but Luke was looking at the social, cultural context in which people were placed in jail because they didn't have the money to buy their way out or to bribe the Roman soldiers. And so Jesus was saying that was the good news. So that is the other element that informs my philosophy and theology of doing ministry in light of the claim of Alexander's that the war on drugs is the new Jim Crow.
Unfortunately, we have reached the half point of our program. I know you can't believe it. You can't believe it. But we did.
We're having fun.
So we're having fun, but we do have to take a 1-minute break. But please stay tuned. We have 2 more important questions that we have our panelists going to unpack for us. We'll be back in 1 minute.
For over 25 years, KNXT has been serving the people of the San Joaquin Valley with good family television that's just not available anywhere else. It's important for you, the viewer, to help support this valuable tool of ministry. KNXT needs to continue to grow and bring you important programming about your faith. But sometimes it's hard to stop and find the time. Make it easy. Go to knxt.tv and find out how easy it is to support your Catholic television station, KNXT TV.
Hello and welcome to the second half of our program on the new Jim Crow with a ministry perspective. Susan, I wonder if you could unpack this second question, and I think it's going to follow nicely on the reading from Luke. How do you personally engage prison injustice from your faith perspective? What gives you your foundation?
The story of Zacchaeus comes to mind when I think about Jesus' interaction with people that he was ministering to. When Jesus first saw Zacchaeus, he was up in a tree. He was so excluded from the main social group that he didn't have anyone to usher him to the front of the place where he could see Jesus directly. He wasn't well liked. Zacchaeus had all kinds of labels. He was called a fraudster, a con perhaps. He was stealing from his community. He was a thief and a robber, and people knew it. and they didn't like him. But Jesus saw through those labels by seeing a Zacchaeus up in the tree, and he said, Zacchaeus, come down, I'm coming to your house for dinner. And this metaphor of feasting, I think, is just absolutely beautiful. The idea that Jesus says, you know what, I see past your labels and I choose to eat with you. And this banqueting table of God, I find that as a very defining metaphor, not only of the kingdom of God, but of Jesus' ministry on earth. And very, very recently I had the opportunity to participate in a feast-like event called Dismiss. And you may be familiar with Dismiss. Dismiss is the legendary name of the thief on the cross who said to Jesus, remember me. And Jesus said to Dismiss, this day you will be with me in paradise. And so in honor of this thief that feasts with Jesus right now, an ecumenical group of people get together every other week to feast with people coming out of jail and prison. And one of the defining characteristics of this feast is celebration. You know, people are coming from all different places in life. People who used to be parole officers and people who've been on parole, people who got out of prison yesterday, are meeting with people from very, all walks of life to celebrate. And so every week there's a cake. And the cake has lots of candles. And when it's time to blow out the candles, people celebrate anniversaries, they celebrate new babies, they celebrate days clean, they celebrate days off parole, they celebrate new apartments and new jobs. And just the common humanity, the commonness, the things that bring us together are celebrated. And I think that's so life-giving, to share life in our ordinariness, but in real, radical, transformative relationships. And the thing that comes to mind for me is that when Jesus saw Zacchaeus up in the tree, he didn't do drive-by evangelism.
Yeah.
There was no hit and run. It wasn't kind of sharing the good news and getting out of there. Jesus was in there at the dinner table building a real, radical, transformative relationship. And to me, that's the power of life in Christ and ministry, Jesus style.
And that's something you've experienced in Toronto.
It was beautiful.
And is there any way that we're going to, well, we'll talk later about the next steps we have to take, but a model like that, I'm sure you would say, and why aren't we doing this?
It was very beautiful for me. I really enjoyed it.
It's inspiring to hear and to know that this is something that is doable, because sometimes we have ideas that could happen, but it's not been happening ever, or we have no model for that. The way you shared it, it's like you know exactly what you've been doing there up in Toronto, and we would love to hear more about it when we talk about next steps and what we can do here. Now, Floyd, it's your turn to share what would be things that you know that you've been able to do that have almost been the Zacchaeus model, but you've done it with different people through the national network. Tell us about that.
Well, we're a grassroots organization. We believe getting outside the four walls of the church. We believe that the community is the vineyard. The Bible says go out in the vineyard and work. And so we believe that wherever there's, as police would call hot spots, that's where we go and show who we are and hug our brothers, hug our sisters. Let them talk to us. Let them tell us what's going on with them. And I believe that when we go into the community, and we not go into a community judging people, telling them that they're going to go to hell and tell them where they're going to go, demonizing them, but going in and respecting them as a human being. I believe in empowering people. I understand the word help. I know what that means. It sounds good, but I believe that if I can give someone, empower them, they can help themselves. So when I deal with a community like mine, West Fresno, that has been stripped, raped the resources of my community, that I feel that we can go in and educate them about their rights, how to conduct themselves when they come in contact with a police officer, how to talk, educating them about cop watch, educating them about different variable things that normal churches would not do. And so I believe that we have to, at this point in life, get out of tradition right now. As I told my congregation, as I preached last week at church, I said, all of you might want to get some tennis shoes and make sure you have them here on Sunday morning. Because if the Spirit tells me that we're going to go out in the vineyard community and knock on doors and meet and greet people, then that's what we're going to do. And so I think that, again, that's out the norm. And so, because in Hosea 6:4 says that my people are destroyed for the lack of knowledge. Knowledge is power. And if you have no knowledge of self, if you have no knowledge of who you are, if you have no knowledge of your history, you become preyed on. And so I think that that's something that we do in our community, that black history, all history is important, but we teach black history, not just during Black History Month. Yeah. It's 12 months out the year, 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. And so I believe that when people can understand their past, they can deal with the future more better. And so that's pretty much what we do.
Thank you so much. Karen, answering that question, where would you want to be able to show us things that have actually been concrete ministries that you've become involved in?
Yes, Jim, thank you. I just would like to begin with a statement from the Methodist pastor John Wesley, who stated that the world is his parish. And as Reverend Harris was able to identify his geographical location and what that means for impacting a community, and as Susan raises the issue of ministry is a communal as well as a familial reality and not just merely individualistic. And so therefore, Jesus shares of the knock that occurred at midnight. And I got a mysterious call in the midday in my office one day. It was from a prisoner, an adult offender in a prison mental health hospital in Southern California. And he was looking for professors who were able to support him in his research on prison recidivism and the ways that issues, how he has been trying to rehabilitate himself, but the institution does not lend itself to rehabilitation. And so therefore he continues to end back up in the prison system. And he said, "Can somebody out there to help me?" And so for the past several months, I have been in telephone conversation, I have been in letter correspondence, and he wants to develop a website so that he can create a forum, a roundtable forum for a better understanding. Wow!
This is great.
And so that his voice can be heard. I also had the opportunity to interview him over the phone to hear his story, and in the process of developing a docudrama so that we can have a much broader appeal to the realities. As my colleague Ryan has shared in our earlier show, as far as how do we build those relationships with individual prisoners, this has taken shape in a very real and concrete way as I'm understanding my responsibility to love my neighbor and my brother.
Our third question is going to give us maybe a minute each for you to respond. In the light of the new Jim Crow, with what we've been doing in these 4 programs, what might be some next steps that we could be taking in our Christian ministry? And once again, we could begin with Susan.
Well, just briefly, it seems like relationships are so important. Like Jesus shows us through the story of Zacchaeus just the power of radical, real, risk-taking and transformative relationships. So I think relationships are important, but as Dr. Crozier said as well, it's not an individualistic kind of thing. I believe that this is a very crucial time for Fresno, and there's a lot of need. And that requires community collaboration. And community collaboration is powerful, but I think that's the next step, community risk-taking.
Karen, where would you see some of this risk-taking? What could it be modeled on? What scripture would you go to? What final thought?
Yes, as Susan, Reverend Kroeker is sharing around, this is a prime time for Fresno. AB 109 is a critical issue in which we're having a realignment of public funds for the release of the prisoners into our county jails. And so what does that mean for how we can begin to lobby as a faith community or advocate for the ways that education, treatment, as well as other wraparound processes can be developed in community where we deal with the root of the addiction that exists amongst our sisters and brothers who are being released at this time, who are low-level drug offenders. So we can definitely get involved in that, begin to have reflection about what does it mean for us to be able to be a welcoming community, and then to do it.
Floyd, how would you see some steps that we perhaps haven't taken yet? What's the next thing we as individuals and as community, as church, could do?
I believe to go to Dr. Crozier Peace Circles is a real good way to engage. The way she creates the atmosphere, the environment, you're in a comfortable environment. But I think a lot of, if someone could get some training, I believe that could spread across the community of bringing peace and understanding, and also being engaged. The internet is a very powerful piece. I mean, if you can go to the library, if you don't have one, get to the internet, just type in whatever you want to research. All that data will come up. Books. I mean, this book here is a life changer, you know, and this is the book that we've been studying, reading, engaging in, you know, and if you can find someone that could really, you know, tell the truth. I mean, for as the social issues that we're dealing with today, and that's what I would say.
Well, I want to thank you for what you said right now. I want to thank Susan and Karen and Ryan for wrapping up these last 2 weeks a 4-session look at the new Jim Crow through the eyes of Michelle Alexander, looking at how we are perhaps needing to see our faith and race and the new Jim Crow in some sort of a connection. We hope that these programs have been leading you that way and that you will take concrete steps. Why don't we post up how to reach Dr. Crozier? If you could reach Karen, it would be very good that you could follow up with these peace circles or anything else that she will lead you to in the form of reading, in the form of community building, and in the area of prophetic ministry that will be based on reality, that will be based on the concrete situation that we are facing in Fresno. Till next week, God bless.